Hang on just a second.
No problem. That's good money. Yeah.
Poker toe?
Boker Tove.
Over and toast.
T-O-V. Tove.
Not poker.
That's good morning or good afternoon, depending on what day.
My afternoon is a little different.
Yeah.
I didn't memorize that one.
Before we
Because
go,
it's not very-
good morning.
Very used. You know, that's a phrase. Anyway, we're gonna go back to Matthew chapter 5. If you're using the book of Yahweh, it is on page 730 and 731. You know, I'll kind of recap where we were last week. Last week, we were in Matthew chapter 5, verse 1 through 32. And some would know it also as the Beatitudes. Yeshua is going over a certain condition within the people and saying, let's break through the lies and disinformation of what the Pharisees and Sadducees were saying. I don't know why I'm getting so much feedback on this. Do you know?
I just have to adjust to the rhythm. Go ahead and talk and I'll be
Page
adjusting.
7, chapter 5, starting in verse 33. We went through 1 through 32. Yeah, that's still pretty intense. How is that? Is that getting any better? A little bit? Yes, no? Show of hands. No? Okay. All right. Thank you, Joe. All right, so we go to verse 33. Again, you have heard that it was said by the people of the ancient times, when a man vows a vow to Yahweh, or vows an oath to bind himself to some pledge, he shall not break his word. He must do everything he would do. That he said he would do. Thank you. Now, I would like for you to keep your finger here, but also follow with me to Deuteronomy chapter 6. The reason why that's important is this is where the Messiah was getting this from. And what that is it's about the oaths and vows, and that's on page 152. In 152. And it's 12 through 14. Beware that you do not forget Yahweh, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage. Yahweh your Father, you must reverence, and him you must serve, and by his name you must take your oaths. So what we're seeing is that Rishim and the sages at that time were actually taking an oath, like as if we were standing up here at this podium, saying, you know what, I'm going to take an oath of heaven, but by this land. Well, the Messiah is going to disprove that. And as he does that in Matthew chapter 23, but we'll get there. And the reason why this is so important is they would start an oath or a vow and say, hey, this is what we're going to do, but we're going to do it under this. And now they would try and make it sound holy. You know, obviously they didn't have a lamp then. You know, that's like our former, or this lamp that we have current. They didn't have a light bulb then. So, you know, they would make it sound very prestigious. Anyway, that what they would do is they'd break it because they'd say, well, I wasn't really under that vow. Let's take another step. Let's go over to Numbers, which will be to your left, chapter 30, in verse 2 through 5, and that's going to be page 138, if you have that in the Yahweh Bible. When a man vows a vow to Yahweh, or vows an oath to bind himself to some pledge, he shall not break his word. He must do everything he said he would do. When a young woman still living in her father's house vows a vow to Yahweh, or vows an oath to bind herself to some pledge, and her father hears about her vow or pledge, but says nothing to her, then all her vows and every pledge by which she has obligated herself will stand. But if her father forbids her when he hears about it, none of her vows or pledges will stand. Yahweh will release her because of her father has forbidden her. Now, the reason why I take you here is this entire chapter goes over this. It is very, very plain that not only the women, but the men as well, that we are not to make vows or oaths that we don't want to keep. And if our if you're married, and let's say your wife or your husband makes a vow, the husband has the option also override it and say, no, if this is the first time I'm hearing this, that is not going to be a vow. Because sometimes they would say something that may be irrational to the husband of the family. And so with this, it's giving them a way out so that they're not going to cause themselves trouble in the future. Now, if you're a widow or you have been properly divorced and you do say something in a vow form, you are to uphold. So that's why we stopped right here, because otherwise that's what the rest of that chapter covers. Now, the reason why this is important that the Messiah is making this note is he's making the case for everybody that hears him to understand that we're not under man-made laws and traditions. So when they're under the man-made laws and traditions, which is talking about Maasim, the Hebrew words for those, is that they would put themselves under these vows that they couldn't accomplish. So the Messiah is saying, don't do it. Just don't do it. Make your yes, and your no, your no. And if you are going to say that I vow something, vow it under the Father and say his name. So let's stand on his name. So we're going to go back to Matthew chapter 5, and I'll continue on. So verse 34, but I say to you, do not bind your oaths at all, not by heaven, for it is Yahweh's throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of our great King. Neither bind an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. But vow your vow, then let your yes be yes, or simply do not vow. And let your no be no. Anything more than this is from the evil one. So I also want to take a look at what he says in Matthew chapter 23. So keep your fingers still here with Matthew chapter 5. And we're going to go to page 751 if you have Yahweh Bible. And we're going to start in verse 16. Woe to you, blind guides who say, whoever binds an oath by the temple, it is not binding. But whoever binds an oath by the gold in the temple, he is obligated. Blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the altar which sanctifies the gold? Again, whoever binds an oath by the altar, is it not binding? But whoever binds an oath by the offering on it, he is obligated. Blind fools, which is greater, the offering or the altar which sanctifies the offering? Therefore, whoever binds an oath by the altar binds it and everything on it. Whoever binds an oath by the temple binds it and him who dwells there. And he who binds an oath by heaven binds by the throne of Yahweh and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! For you pay tithes on mint and anise and cumin, but have neglected the more important matters of the law: judgment, mercy, and faith. Tithing you have done without leaving the other undone. So we'll go back to chapter 5, and then I'll finish my thought on this. The reason why this was so important was that the Messiah is debunking exactly what we were talking about. This whole time, people are put under so much stress and strain of the mind because they don't understand that there's not an oral Torah that we have to follow, but it's the written Torah that was followed by Moses all the way through Mount Sinai to the time that the Israelites went into their land. And then, of course, because they didn't follow it, they themselves went into captivity. And what the Messiah is saying is that when the Pharisees and the Sadducees became of power, they said, hey, we got to change some of these rules because we're too lax. Well, if it was too lax for Yahweh, he would have already made that occur. But it didn't need to occur. So what they did is created a stumbling block for the people. And we are not to have the word as a stumbling block. There is no word that will become a stumbling block. But what it does is it reveals the inner man. And so Yeshua is revealing this truth to the people because they were put under this bondage for so many years, if not decades, if not for a couple of centuries. So we're looking at, something that's now ingrained in their culture.
no different than here in America where we have Santa for Christmas, and we know that it's not true. And we have the Easter Bunny, for Easter, which we know is Passover. It's not even supposed to be a bunny. So we have an unholy representation of something. So this is where, the Messiah is saying, let's cut through the BS. Let me show you the truth of Yahweh, and let us stand on his authority. Let's simply make a yes or a no. And that's why with the vows, as we had talked before, they are so crucial. If we say that we're going to do something, let's stick to that so that we get it done, not for our peers, but for Yahweh in heaven first. And so then when he sees us, he's pleased with that. Because that's where we internally need to go. And this is where Yeshua was going with this. Because he said, look, prior to verse 33, what did we see? He was talking about the adulterous woman or the adulterous man. And he was talking about premeditated murder, or murder. Premeditated remarriage. And the reason why that's so important is it does murder your marriage. But the simple fact that you and I, we're to have our focus on him. And if our focus is on him, then our relationship with our partner should be mutual. And if there is a problem, we can forgive them. What does it say? It says to forgive them how many times a day? 77 times 7. That's a lot. 490 times. Now, if anybody sins against me 490 times a day, I'm probably going to rethink my relationship with that person. But for all of us, I don't think any of us have offended ourselves or others in this room that many times a day. And just as Pastor Joe was saying earlier, if we don't forgive other people, the Messiah won't forgive us. Well, with these vows, we also have to look to those and say, Yahweh, if we broke any of these, how do we turn our attention back to you for them? Like you were saying with television or anything else, if there's anything that's a stumbling block, whether it's this item or that item, how do we remove this so we can honor him again? And what the Messiah did. Because otherwise, we're just saying what the Messiah did was for nothing. And the Messiah says that's not true. He says, I came and did this to finalize the work for my Father, to glorify him. And what it's going to do is it's going to bring in a new fold of people that are going to follow and worship the Father and him. And so it's a beautiful scene. But if we're not paying attention to the word, and we're not getting fed by his word, we're not getting that reflection back to us to understand where we're falling and we're being then raised up by our peers, we are blind. We are no different than what he says in Matthew chapter 23. And so this is why the Messiah is saying, please, let's break these things down. Let's break out all the rules and disinformation that are coming from the enemy, in which he still wanted them in the fold too. But because they were so steeped in their doctrine, they believed that they were above God or Yahweh here on earth. And they said, we no longer need to listen to them. We don't need to listen to the Father above, and we've defeated him. In fact, they say that in some of their Talmud readings. So, when we look at that, then we say, okay, well, here's a book from history, but it's not as accurate as what Yahweh is saying through either his son or other disciples. So as we're continuing on in Matthew chapter 5, in verse 38, you have heard that it is said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist one who is evil, but whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other cheek also. If a man wants to sue you in court to take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. Whoever forces you to go a mile, go with him 2. Give him who asks you, and from him who would borrow from you, do not turn away. And so right here with retaliation, as it says, that we're not to repay. If it's something that's going to harm our salvation, Yahweh wants us to give to him. And there's many circumstances throughout all of our lives that this has occurred. And so the best thing that we can do is say, okay, Father, I'm not in control of this. And if we actually look at our entire life, are you in control of when you're breathing and you sleep? Are you in control of, every moment that you try to swallow something without dying? Are you, having had a minor heart attack myself, neck issues, can't hardly swallow things. I know these things and I don't want to take them for granted. And so at that moment, when you're suffocating and you're thinking about this, you're going, did I happen to forgive everybody? Because, if my next moment I'm on eternity's end, you got to think that through. Am I ready right now to walk into everlasting? And if I'm not, and I'm still holding back things that can either prevent a blessing or release myself from a curse, why don't we do that? And I think that that's the reflection that we have to look at, even when these tests and trials come. This is what we talked about last week. That we know that as we go into it, Matthew chapter 1, or Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, when he goes from the beginning of what he's saying, hey, look, if you follow me, these things are going to happen. And we talked about that specifically. And we know that it's going to happen. So if it's going to happen, then he's giving us the tools to get out of it. So these are the tools that we need to put around our waist. And that's why he says, gird your waist with truth. But we can't if we don't know the truth. And so this is where we're breaking it down. We're dissolving what some are trying to say versus what Yahweh's word does say. So as we continue on, love your enemies in verse 43. You have heard that it has been said, you will love your brother, but hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy, bless those who curse you, do well to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. So here is something that's a fact. That the Messiah is not just saying, it may or may not happen. He's saying, these will come. And when these men or these women or this group come to you, and this is how they want to spitefully use you, pray for their salvation. But as you had said earlier in your teaching as well, that, let's not keep them in the internal camp. If they come up and they're hungry, great, let's give them something. But then they have to go somewhere else. Don't let them stay here, because their ideas and doctrines will pollute what we have going toward righteousness. And we have always seen that throughout history. If we look at Isaiah and all the other prophets, they all talk about it. They all talk about, hey, let's go toward holiness or destruction is going to happen. And they're warning us. They're always telling us this warning. And if we're not heeding it from the master himself, which is the Messiah, he's saying, look, I'm telling you, these enemies are coming. He knows. He's seen it, and he knows the truth. The other part, too, and I don't know if everybody in this room knows this. I know that Pastor Joe and I know this, and Rosemary perhaps. But when he's talking about the mile marker, if somebody asks you to take 1 mile with them, we have to realize that they were also captured by the Romans. What the Romans would say is, hey, you're going to be a shield bearer for me, or, you're going to carry my armor, or you're going to carry my stuff. And they would. They would then force somebody within their captivity to walk X amount of paces or X amount of minutes. Wouldn't matter. If they just said, hey, go, you got to go with us for a set period of paces, you're going to go. And so this is where he's saying, do not refuse them, but also bless them. Give them a little bit more than what they expected. And during that time, what do you have to do? Praise and worship. So while you're walking, they're going to go, man, this guy's peculiar. What's on his mind back here? And you know what? You might actually get that soldier to think twice. And I'll get into that in another time. But there were those that actually did stand up for the faith during this time as Roman soldiers, and they were put to death for it. And they also, the defector, one of their head leaders took their place. Multiple men that are not going to give up. And he said, you know what? We know the truth. And, they got everything going for them. You got to think of, if it was modern day, these guys were the best of the best. They got paid the most. They were, in the best physical shape. Everybody wanted to be one. And not everybody could fit that mold. And so if you had a Roman soldier that you can convert for the Messiah's sake, how much greater of a soldier is that person? Now he's going to honor not only his battalion or his legion or whomever it is that's above him, but he's also honoring Yahweh and wants to fight for truth. Wow. That's courageous. That's pretty awesome. So as we're starting to see these things, this is why he says, when these tests come, if you pass the test and you help that other person and you motivate them, guess what? You don't know who you're helping. That person may spring up and be the next, who knows? Maybe an Apostle Paul for that generation or that group of people. And we won't know it if we don't get outside of our comfort. And this is what the Messiah is saying, is you're always going to have to be out of your comfort zone with this. It's not the easiest thing to come up here and prepare for each week and think about what we're going to talk about. I mean, we pray all week. We think about what we're going to do all week, and we have other obstacles in our week as well. I mean, there's travels that we have to do. There's things that break, and in all that, how are we being a witness through it? And I know that each of us have our own problems, and I love that about how to help me because Lily always helps me with that. Whenever I get out of step, she's like, "Hey, why are you being mean? Why are you being grumpy?" Oh, okay. And I'm seeing those problems and I'm having, and she's not even an enemy. And so we talk about these things at the end of the day so that when we go to bed, we have peace as well. And as we try to reflect through the word, she's trying to learn, and in her learning, it's an infancy stage. And so as we gradually go through things make more sense. And, having come from that Catholic background for her, these things are completely opposite of what she knows. And so it's interesting to see where she's come from to where she is today. And she loves to praise and worship. Unfortunately, she's not feeling good right now, but we'll continue on here. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the publicans do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the publicans do the same? Therefore, become perfect, just as your Father who is in heaven is perfect. And what I want to say about this, and I mean, it's pretty simple in how he sums that up. But if we act identical to what everybody else does out there, they're not going to see anything different here. And that's why, when we try to reach out to the widows, we try to help the orphans, we try to help those who don't have as much. We're not necessarily asking for any kind of income from it. We're just going to do it. Why? Because if we don't do it, we're not representing the kingdom properly. We're not doing it, even for our enemies, in a kind way where we're saying, hey, look, this is the truth. We would like to sit down with you and just talk about it in a non-confrontational way. And if we can't accomplish that, we'll leave you alone. But we just want you to know we're praying for you. And, in those circumstances, we know that the enemy is going to spit in our face. They're going to lie about us. They're going to backbite us. That's okay. Because as long as we stick to the original vows that we attempt to, and we stay next to the Messiah, the enemy will come in. But he says that in the word, if we are near or looking toward the Messiah and the Father, resisting the devil, he must flee from us. So even in these smaller situations that seem like it's a string of events all the time. And the reason why that is because if we're alive, we're not just floating down a stream. It's not merely, life is but a dream. No, you're awake. It's not the American dream. We're living the American life by living. We're awake. We're coherent. And it's a struggle. We're going upstream, not downstream. And we're fighting everything on the way up. And so as we're to encourage one another. And as we get encouraged by the word, by the renewing of our souls, I just want to paint the broadest picture I possibly can. If we're following after the Messiah with this, then these things will come. Treat every person as if you treat them like yourself, like the Messiah said to do. And he said, guess what? You're going to make the right answer then. Because you're not going to smack your friend. And you're not going to smack your friend or your enemy if you're treating them like yourself. And that's what the Messiah was trying to get across, was everything that we do, if we do it unto Yahweh and Yeshua, then we're doing it the right way. And like, I'll get out in the mornings and I'll feed the chickens. I'll go out there and talk to them, sing to them, pet them, love on those little guys, And I do it because I know that our Father's watching. And, for me, it's a little painful because we all have to, stoop down a little bit, bend through the door, and then you catch, some of the baling wire, catch you on the back or, on your arms. I'm always walking in with safety glasses. I don't want to lose these things. Well, anyway, it's a task every day. And I think that we can get stuck in the mundane. And as we look at these things, if we honor the Father and just say, you know what, I'm doing this because you've given it to me for now to do. And no matter what it is, whether it's taking out trash or if it's raising a child, if we're doing it for Yahweh, we're doing exactly what the Messiah said to do. And if we teach them through these attitudes, which I think everybody should reread Matthew chapter 5, and think about that. Are we living to this? Just even these few things that the Messiah is saying to do. And if not, how do we change it? How do we go back to that? How do we revert our minds to the truth so that we can cut out the lies and quit listening to that voice that's coming from the enemy? And that's all of us as we all try and get refined through our walks. How are we looking toward the Father and waiting on him? Because we can't wait on him if we're sitting there watching soap operas, or watching the latest movies, for listening to the latest gossip on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. If we're constantly cruising the internet for the next best thing, we're missing it. Truly, we're to look for the Father. And I know that hits all of us, inside as well as outside. I think I've been knocked on the head a few too much, and so now I'm going, hey, you know what, Father, I get it. I'd rather be right where I'm at and understand his word and attempt to portray it as best as possible. And I think that, each of us having different parts that we have within our community, we can help one another and also be strengthened by one another. So as we're looking at things together, we can say, well, how does this apply in our lives? Well, right now I don't have an enemy coming up the gate, throwing rocks at me yet, so I don't have that test or testimony to give to you. But when that day comes, I pray that each one of us that's in this room is here for that, so that we can all grow through that event. And, if there's an end to it, if we die and we can go to the Father and say, hey, we got stoned for you. That's interesting. Modern day, you got stoned to death, But we can at least then say, hey, we're trying to go through these tests and trials. And some of them aren't going to be that harsh. Some of them are going to be more like Facebook, somebody backlashing against us, or, possibly from a YouTube channel that says, well, these guys aren't following. It's okay. Everybody's, has the ability to have their own opinion. But what we have to do is take everybody from a basic step, from that basic foundation, and move very slowly, but methodically together so that we have everybody's attention and so that we don't lose anybody in the congregation, and we can help others also who don't understand. So as they come along with us and go, wow, I now understand what that scripture means, because now they're seeing it in a fuller context. And I think as the Messiah is talking to his disciples in that way, they're still not getting it. They're getting bits and pieces by this point, but they're also speaking it in a different language. So their language allows them to understand at a deeper level than English. But that's for another time. Typically we talk about that on our Wednesday nights. But for this, I just want us to take away that as the Messiah triumphantly overtakes his first 40 days of his ministry, after his waiting for 40 days, after being anointed to eat or drink anything, he defeated the enemy already, and he knew that this was going to be a long journey. So by the time he gets to this point, which is the Sermon on the Mount, this is his first official sermon that he gives. And knowing this, he wanted to lay out that roadmap for all of us so that we understood from beginning to end, hey, look, here's the stuff that we don't need to know because this isn't coming from the Father. And these are the things to look forward to, which may be trials and tests that we may not be able to overcome at this very moment. But if we stay focused on him, we're going to get an answer, because he doesn't leave us without a way. He says that in his word, that whenever something does come in our midst as a test or a trial, he gives a way out. So if we're focused on him, he's going to give us the answer. It's no different than if we're in class taking a test right now, and the Father says, you know what? Answer these 10 questions. You get them right, then we're going to go on to the next test. And I know that as we all take tests and we're put through trials, each one of them looks a little bit different, but he's trying to build our character to make us better for him. He's trying, and I know that some people who understand jewelry more than I do, they understand what dross is. I had no clue really until I started understanding the Bible. But if you look at, you want purity of gold or silver or any other item, you have to pull all the other impurities out of it. And that's what the Father's doing to us. He's saying, look, I want you to be the prettiest, shiniest, whatever it's going to be for eternity. And how do we do that? We have to go through trials. We have to go through tests. And the Messiah was making sure that his disciples heard this and making sure that anybody else that was going to follow him heard this, because he said, this is going to be a mark of the chosen ones. You're going to be tested and tried all the time because your testimony has to grow. And what do we know about stagnation? Well, we know that if we're not growing, we're sliding backward. And so the Father's saying, look, we got to press forward, press forward. And as the hot gets hotter and we get more purified, the better we become, the more we celebrate him. Guess what? When we get to eternity, we're not going to be like, hallelujah, praise Yeshua. Now, no, we've already been doing that for years here. So it's not going to be anything new. And that's what he wants. He wants us to be so renewed in his word and the love toward him and the obedience to his word. But he says, by the time you're with me for eternity, this will be home. You want it to be your home. And that's why I'm at home and doing what I do, because I love doing this. I love understanding it, eating it. In fact, a cool truth that modern Israelites do is that whenever they're reading Torah and they've got their children, they'll pour honey if they have put it like on a separate page, and they'll have the child read it with them. And then after they get done reading it, they get to lick the honey off. Why is that? Because then they associate that the word is sweet, that it is good, that it brings life. And so as we think about the Torah, I want us to think in that way as well. Be captured as if it is food, it's nourishment, and it's also something sweet. Because when it's coming from the Father, he's not bringing us bitterness. He's bringing us glad tidings. And through the Messiah, he says, through his testimony, since he had died and raised again, his yoke is easy, his burden is light. And if that's the case, then his word is sweet and his burden is light. And as we see things, we just go, all right, Father, I don't know how this is going to work out, but I'm going to pray. And as we go in that direction as a whole, we get to see and interact with one another and go, okay, great, now we got to see that. And, Pastor Joe over here or Judy, and each of us get a little slice of what they got to learn. And then hopefully when it comes to my turn, I've learned enough from my peers to go, okay, I got the answer on that. And that's what the Messiah is conveying, so that none of us are bitter, that we're not going to be vengeful, we're not going to go out and try and hurt other people, we're not trying to commit adultery, we're trying to stay focused on the Father. And I know I'm pretty long-winded with that one on Matthew chapter 5, but I'm hoping that drives home all of what we were talking about, so that as a whole, when we walk out of here, we actually are more edified than when we came. So with that, I'll close and pray. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for your word. Thank you again today. We said the enemy has no stronghold with us. We talked about today because, Father, we understand that what the Messiah was saying, we need to stand on his truth. We need to prepare our minds that when the enemy comes, we are to come to you to dissolve the issue and to give you praise and have a testimony that is worthy of heaven. So as we say these things, we just also pray for everybody that has been injured or destroyed through this pandemic that we've had through our country and around the world. And we just want to lift up every leader in every country, and we just pray that you, Yahweh, bring them salvation through this pandemic. Bring them your word, and bring each of the families that have had someone hurt or died through this pandemic closure and healing. We just pray these things in your name, Yeshua. Shalom.
Where's dog stinks? If we can have food.
But yeah, that's what I got. But Yahweh is just so awesome with this. I hope that wasn't too much.